Good to go. All right, hello everybody, welcome back. So here we are, and I think we're still a little behind schedule. Like, I hope to be on the respiratory already, but I'm trying to close off cardiovascular today and get into the lymphatics. Again, for chapter 21 in OpenStax or chapter 22 in Martini, we aren't going to cover the immune system in detail just yet for exam 2. I'm leaving that for your last exam 3. Okay, so then we were talking about how you control or how your body controls its blood flow and pressure. So we talked about autoregulation. So these are things that can happen at your capillary beds, things like chemical signals like increased carbon dioxide or nitric oxide or a lack of oxygen. Those can all cause blood vessels to open up, or things like prostaglandins can cause little capillary beds to close off. Now, nervous regulation we're going to cover real quick, and also endocrine regulation, because there are many hormones that actually control your blood pressure. So the baroreceptor reflexes. Now, if the nervous system and all of the nervous tissue is a long distant memory, let's refresh what baroreceptors are. So whenever you have the term baro in the medical term, it refers to some sort of pressure. Now, a baroreceptor, and again, this is one of the times, like in physiology and in your textbooks, they flip between receptors as cells and receptors as proteins. When we talk about baroreceptors, we're talking about cells that detect pressure. So it's not like the membrane receptors, those little proteins in the plasma membrane of a cell. Now we're talking about a cell that detects pressure. And then you have vascular nerves. So the interesting thing is, like, whenever you have a reflex, there's some sort of sensation and it causes an automatic response. So again, remember efferent. Well, baroreceptors, these are the sensory part, and the vascular nerves that, or I think the OpenStax version uses nervi vasorum. These are nerves that can innervate the smooth muscle of the tunica media in your blood vessels. And when they fire off and activate the smooth muscle, it causes them to contract and constrict, thereby tightening up those blood vessels. Okay. Did we lose connection? Oh, maybe, I don't know. Okay, so what we have here is that the increased blood pressure. So how do the baroreceptors work? So baroreceptors, these increase the firing of, so basically when you have an increased pressure, that causes these activates these baroreceptors. Now what it does is multiple things. It increases the cardiac inhibitors and decreases the cardiac accelerator. And what are these centers? Well, again, centers in general refers to areas in the brain that have specific functions, or actually not in the brain necessarily. These are actually in the medulla oblongata, or I mean, if you're talking about cerebrum and brain and central nervous system, but basically there's some sort of center that controls something. So the cardiac inhibitor is like the brakes, and the cardiac accelerator is like the gas for your heart. So what it's doing, it's slamming on the brakes and letting up on the gas. So that's what we have there. And what we have here is the autonomic innervation of the heart. So here we have our medulla oblongata. And the sympathetic nerves, these are the ones that are like the gas. They're going to increase the heart rate and contraction, whereas the vagus nerve, that cranial nerves 10, that's going to slow the heart. So again, the sympathetic is like the gas for the heart. Parasympathetic is like the brakes. Okay, so then remember this equation from our cardiac physiology. So cardiac output equals heart rate times stroke volume. So the cool thing about the cardiac inhibitor and accelerator centers is that they control both heart rate and stroke volume. And again, if you're if algebra isn't your strong suit, one thing you can do is just plug in numbers. So say you have a starting cardiac output. Maybe your patient has a slightly elevated heart rate, so about 120 beats per minute. And then they have a slightly increased stroke volume, so 80 mils per beat. So 120 times 80, what is that? 9,600, right? So or convert to liters, 9.6 liters per minute. Now let's drop their heart rate and let's drop their beats per stroke volume. So we're going to drop their heart rate down to 80 beats per minute, and we're going to drop their stroke volume to 60 mils per beat. So what's the new value of their cardiac output? 8 times 6 is 48. You have 2 zeros, so 4,800 mils or 4.8 liters. So now we have a drop in heart rate and stroke volume that basically cut their cardiac output in half. Now how does this relate? Well, remember our equation. Flow equals pressure drop over resistance. And remember, sometimes, especially if you're going to medicine or anything involving radiology, Q is also sometimes used instead of F. But what we have here is that you have a decrease in flow. So what's that going to do? Well, an overall decrease in flow is also going to cause a decrease in pressure drop. So this is why we have a decrease in pressure. Now notice that there's vasodilation as well. So vasodilation in this case, if you ease up on things, remember my classic example about how pressure is related to the blood vessel diameter? Well, again, if you have very tight clothing, that's a lot of pressure, right? But when you wear very loose clothing, that eases up on the pressure. So what this slight vasodilation does is provide a little boost in easing up on the pressure against your blood vessel walls. So what do you have overall? Now you have your overall drop in blood pressure. Or another way you can think of the vasodilation, we have reduced flow, right? So we have, in this example, we have half the flow. But what if you put or say you have you have water flowing through your garden hose, and then you turn it to half of the flow, like half the speed of flow, and now you put half that amount of water into a bigger tube, like a drainage ditch or a sewage drainage. What about the overall pressure in that? Well, if the piping is too big and there's not enough flow, that's going to cause a lack of pressure. So this is why you have that pressure drop. And then you restore homeostasis due to that. So you go from increased blood pressure, but by slowing down the heart, making it contract a little, not as strong, and also easing up on the overall vessels, you help to drop your blood pressure. What about the other way? So what happens if you decrease blood pressure? Well, maybe you want to increase the accelerator. So this is what's happening here. You're stepping on the gas, you're easing up on the brakes, and you're going to increase the vasomotor center. So what do? Well, for cardiac output, you're going to increase your heart rate and increase your stroke volume. So here we have a sample starting value. So here, what's 100 times 50? 5,000, right? So 5.0 liters per minute. And then over here, we're going to increase it. So definitely tachycardic. So we're going to increase the heart rate. We're also going to increase the stroke volume. So now the heart is pumping out 30 more mils per beat. Multiply the two, and then you get an increase up to, in this case, 12.8 liters per minute. So we more than doubled our cardiac output, right? So by increasing the flow, you're also going to increase the pressure. So it's just like your garden hose, right? What if you turn lefty-loosey and increase the flow rate? Well, that's going to increase the pressure in that hose. That water is going to shoot out further, right? So increasing the flow increases the pressure. And you're also going to constrict the blood vessels a little bit. So that's going to help to increase the overall blood pressure as well. And this is how you restore back to balance and homeostasis.